The second part of our panel on nutrition and the brain, we have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Bonnie Kaplan, who's been with us before. She's Professor Emeritus in the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary in Alberta, Canada. She's a research psychologist, and she studied the role of nutrition in mental illness and brain development. She's published widely on the biological basis of developmental disorders and mental health, particularly the contribution of nutrition to brain development and brain function. She also was the founding principal investigator of the APRIN study, which is the Alberta Pregnancy Outcomes and Nutrition Study, which tracked the development of several thousand Albertan children whose intrauterine nutrient environment was evaluated. So I am delighted to have her come and speak about, are we treating mental disorders or suboptimal nutrition? Please join me in welcoming her.
You can do to restart the clock. It's not at 30 minutes. Okay. You can't see it out there, but I have a clock that says that I've already left something like 7 minutes of lecture in your ears, and none of us knew it. So I've just asked to have that reset. Anyway, thank you very much for having me back. It's a real pleasure to speak to this group. You're such an interesting group, and the questions are so wonderful. And as long as the projectors and the timer works, we'll be fine. So, I want to say a word about my disclosure slide, which I know is a little bit unusual, but I'd like to make a point about it. I have no commercial interest in any company. I never have had, no company has ever funded my research. If I ever want to buy a natural health product that I've studied, and I've studied a few, I have to pay full price for it. Yet every single lecture, somebody in their comments says, I don't believe her. So yeah, it's really kind of strange. Nobody likes to be called a liar, so I've spent a little bit of time trying to figure out why this is so, and this is the point of why I'm commenting. I think it is a sad comment on the state of our mental health research, in particular the psychiatric and pharmaceutical research, that it has been so corrupted by money, as we know, and now we're seeing so many studies being thrown out and overturned and so forth, that there is a whole generation of people who doesn't even realize that there's any other way to do research. If you're studying a product, you must be working for the company. And pardon me, I find that kind of disappointing. It's not my problem, but I think it's a social problem that we have people so used to pharmaceutical money invested and influencing the psychiatric literature. So just wanted to make that comment, and now none of you can write that comment on your feedback saying that I'm not telling the truth. Well, thank you. I always say it's easy to have integrity if you have a good salary, and I've been an academic all my life. But I would also mention that I have observed some of my junior colleagues having to change their research topics because they cannot get funded, and the natural health product companies are not funding research, and we're fine with that. But NIH is not funding it either because this is definitely a digression, but their reviewers don't understand brain metabolism so far, and my colleagues in the States have regularly had applications sent back when they wanted to study a broad spectrum nutrient treatment because the reviewers say, what's the important nutrient? I mean, anyway, so I've started 2 charitable funds. Anybody who wants to talk to me about helping support our junior colleagues who are trying to study this important area, come see me. This is great. I have no idea how many minutes I have left, so I'm just going to talk. I guess they can't fix the timer. So I'm picking up where Fran left off. I really enjoyed her talk. It's important for you to understand that I am speaking about, I'm going to start with population health data, picking up in that sense, but I'm not going to talk about cognitive function. I'm really talking about mental health. So the population health studies in mental health have also been very few, but have been very consistent. The correlational studies have looked at people who eat traditional, unprocessed, Mediterranean, sometimes they call them prudent diets. How's that for value-laden language? And they all pretty much have reported lower rates of mood and anxiety symptoms. In comparison to people who eat the SAD diet, Western, processed, etc., they have higher rate of mood and anxiety symptoms. And I covered a little bit of that last year. I'm not going to go into any other studies, but I have a new one I wanted to point out to you because I think this is really important, and that is to pay attention to our young people. Now, this study, again, cross-sectional, was done in Alberta with about 6,000 kids who are in grade 5. They evaluated diet quality. You can see the food frequency measure mentioned. They evaluated mood, and you can see the measure they used there. I don't need to read it to you. And the results were very interesting. They did find a relationship between their kind of healthy eating index type score and the amount of reports of feeling worry, sadness, or unhappiness. And in fact, for every 10% decrease in diet quality, there was a 10% increase in feelings of sadness and worry. That's really concerning. I mean, we have a lot of parents here, right? Or grandparents. We need to be getting at children at an even younger and younger age and teaching them how to cook and teaching them how to eat. Now, correlational data are important, but there's always the question of direction of causality when you're dealing with mental health. Not so much with cognitive function, Fran, I think, but with mental health, you don't know, is a person eating with that kind of sad dietary pattern because they are sad? Because I've never met anyone who was depressed who craved broccoli, right? I mean, people, there is something to this. When you're down, you're exhausted, you're depressed. I don't know what it is. I think maybe social training about what comfort food is. And so you really need to know whether or not the data I just reported to you is, whether to draw the direction of causality in one direction or the other direction. The answer is probably both. But I need to prove part of it to you. And in order to do that, you need prospective longitudinal studies and you need treatment studies. So prospective longitudinal studies, I only know of 2 actually that meet this kind of criterion, and I'm presenting one to you here by Felice Jack and her group in Australia. They had about 3,000 adolescents, and they basically, at one time point, they measured how they were eating, and again, you can see the measures here, and then, also their mood, and then came back 2 years later and measured how they were eating and their mood and anxiety. And what they found was that the people with the higher healthy diet scores at baseline predicted better mood 2 years later, so that's the longitudinal aspect, and the reverse was true. So this is a really important study for showing that maybe we do crave sad diet kinds of foods. I don't want to call them junk foods. I don't think that's good. Processed foods when we're depressed, but in addition, we can, to a certain degree, predict which of our young people are vulnerable 2 years later to a diagnosis of a mood and anxiety disorder based on the way they're eating now. And that's, I think, an important finding. So what's the obvious solution? It is to tell everyone to eat better, and I think everyone in this room is committed to that. And even though I have spent a lot of my career studying nutrients in pill form, I know our goal is never to put the population on pills. First and foremost, we need to teach people to cook and to eat better, but it's hard to do. We now have only one clinical trial with mental health in which people were randomized to an improved diet, and here's how it worked. And this is the Australian group again. It's important that you understand that nobody in this study who was eating well, a Mediterranean kind of diet, would have gotten into the study. I said that badly, but they were screened out. So these were people with major depressive disorder and who fell below a certain cutoff in terms of the quality of their dietary intake. Then they were randomized to receive either 7 hours of dietary support or 7 hours of social support over the course of 12 weeks. And basically, the diet instruction is what you would predict in terms of whole foods, Mediterranean kind of approach. And I don't have time to go into all the findings here. It shows you the sample there, but the one that's relevant to what we're talking about today is this. The dietary support group showed significantly greater improvement in their depression scores on the Montgomery-Åsberg Depression Rating Scale. And this is the really startling thing. 1/3 went into remission in 12 weeks. Now, that doesn't mean they were completely happy necessarily, but they were below clinical cutoffs on the Montgomery-Åsberg Depression Rating Scale. That is a very dramatic finding, and you know, what it suggests is that every psychiatrist should be teaching their depressed patients first and foremost to change the way they eat, because that's 1/3 of the sample potentially who isn't eating well to begin with, who would never go on to medications maybe. Think about that. Very important study. Now I'm going to move on to a couple of other general points. I don't know how many of you heard me speak last year. I went over study over study over study, and to the point where I felt bored. Some of you were bored. I'm not going to do that today. I want to give you some more overarching general ideas today. And one is why improving diet might not be enough for everyone. And you probably all know someone who's eating a pretty good diet and yet still has some mental challenges. So we certainly have seen that in our studies. So how do we think about this? I'm going to throw out some ideas. One is better than any that I could have come up with. Linus Pauling said it first in '68 and then in 1974. The genes, we know that mental disorders are inherited in families to a certain extent. You can see the family patterns, but the genetic studies have, you know, at most explained maybe 5% of the variance. So what's being inherited? I think Linus Pauling was smart, ahead of his time in many ways. The genes for mental illness are likely the genes that regulate brain metabolism of essential nutrients. So what does that mean? Well, Bruce Ames summarized a model that is very important to me because it helped me understand what is probably happening in the people that we've been studying. It's important that you know that in this article, it's not about mental health, it's about physical health, and it's not about all nutrients, it's only vitamins. But it's a model, a framework. What he pointed out is that as many as 1/3 of genetic mutations that lead to vitamin-dependent physical diseases do so by altering the ability of enzymes to grab on to the cofactors, which are vitamins in this case, which are necessary for optimal efficiency in those metabolic pathways. So as I say to lay people, and I don't think it's such a terrible term, some people have sluggish pathways. And it may be because what's inherited then is the need for more nutrients to make those pathways work. And so for over a decade now, I've been writing about the possibility that I should have said that in all of those cases, and the disorders are described in Ames's summary article, in all those cases, feeding the patients vitamins at the end point, in other words, just treating them with vitamins, completely saturates those pathways, presumably, that's what they think is happening, because the symptoms go away. Okay? So that's my model, because I think some mental symptoms are due to an inborn error of metabolism, where people inherit a polymorphism resulting in decreased binding affinity of the enzymes for cofactors, resulting in slowed metabolic reactions, and in some cases, in the 30 to 40 studies that we've done in broad spectrum micronutrients, minerals and vitamins, we can correct the symptoms at the end point. How to think about this? I want to show you two biochemical pathway slides. One I did show you last year, and I'm sure everyone memorized it. This is, but the other one is new. It's about the omega-3. So this is a little bit of the serotonin pathway. If you notice at the bottom in the blue box, there's tryptophan, and on the upper right is serotonin. I clipped this off the internet over 15 years ago because I was speaking to lots of people, including parents and lay people, and I thought, well, everybody knows what serotonin is. And I could go on to this diagram on the internet, and you can still do this on any pathway you want to pick. Click on the arrows and ask the question, what are the enzymes and what are the cofactors? And the enzymes aren't of great interest, thank goodness, because the names are too long and I'm not a biochemist. But the cofactors are, as you can see, lots of different vitamins and minerals. And so it's fine when people want to go and treat with a few selected vitamins and minerals. But it's not if you're only doing, like, I don't know, B12 and C or whatever your favorite little bag of nutrients is. you're not going to be affecting the pathways that need copper or iron or molybdenum, a trace mineral. So this is the way I think of our foods in the bottom right-hand corner as giving us that broad spectrum. And for some people, I think they need additional nutrients in pill form because you need to flood those pathways for optimal function. And that's, I think, consistent with the research. So this one, this relates to the research on nuts that Fran just reported to you, I think. We all take, I guess I do have a pointer here, but I'm always bad with these pointers. They're always so tiny. Okay, up here you've got walnuts. This, I should tell you first, point out, this is the omega-3 metabolic pathway. This is omega-6 over here. In this case, the enzymes are in the middle, okay? And I've put in, I got this off the internet. I'm sorry, it's a little blurry, it looks like. But do you see these little yellow arrows here, here, here? Every one of those is pointing to places where the enzyme will not work at an optimal rate without the nutrients specified. So in the top one up here, you need vitamin C. I'm reading it down here. What does it say? V3, V6, magnesium, and zinc, for example. So we go along and we eat our walnuts because we want to have, you know, lots of EPA and DHA down here. But if you do not have adequate amounts of vitamins and minerals, and the American data shows that 75% of our populations are deficient, not suboptimal, but deficient in at least one micronutrient, referring to minerals and vitamins as micronutrients in this case. So if you do not have optimal levels or sufficient for optimal functioning of those nutrients, those pathways will not be efficient. And so, frankly, in my opinion, not that I did this yet, but I think we should all be studying micronutrients with omega-3s. That would be my next study if I hadn't retired. Okay. So in summary, so I'm off the hook, but I'll find someone and I'll fund them through my charitable fund, okay? So in summary so far, brain metabolism is dependent on the availability of sufficient cofactors that include vitamins and minerals, and some people with mental health challenges may not get a sufficient amount from their diets for their individual inherited needs, okay? We're talking about complex individual differences here, and we sure need people to study them and define what they are. So there are lots of other mechanisms to consider relevant to mental health, relevant to today's program. I'm talking about metabolism a bit, but there's certainly the anti-inflammatory effects, the epigenetic effects, and microbiome effects. So I don't want you to think that I think I'm telling you the whole story. So one of my colleagues often says this to me, you know, Bonnie, when we look at things differently, we see different things. And this rings very true to me in relationship to the mitochondrial research. So there is a large amount of research on depression, mood, and anxiety disorders, all the common medical disorders or mental disorders being associated with sluggish pathways, but also with inflammation. And so at the ends of most of those studies, if you read the discussion section, they always end by saying, and wouldn't it be great, we need to develop more drugs for inflammation. Now, the older I get, the more I'm open to the ideas of more drugs for, you know, all kinds of chronic health problems, inflammation too. But I keep wondering, why isn't anyone talking about how we usually fight inflammation? We have a brilliant mechanism for fighting inflammation, and that is ATP produced by mitochondria. So this is just a little reminder. I know that most of you already know that. All mitochondrial function is dependent on nutrients. And a while ago, I asked one of my students, Kevin McLeod, to go and do a lit review for me and list all the maybe 30 vitamins and minerals that were in the various formulas that we had been studying, and go and find out which ones might be relevant to mitochondrial function and optimal ATP production. The question is, are there any that aren't? I don't think so. After a few days, he stopped. We had other things to do. But this is all the B vitamins. You know, this was just kind of an academic exercise. Here we have vitamins C, D, and E, lithium, getting into the minerals, magnesium, manganese, selenium, zinc, coenzyme Q10, of course, omega-3 fatty acids. The point is We have a natural mechanism for fighting inflammation, and I think by improving diet and maybe using nutrients in pill form, that we should be looking at that before medication. And that's related to the whole mental health issue. And this is just one article of mine that I don't mean to sound like I'm tooting my horn, but this is, I think, the best article I have been involved in with my colleagues, trying to explain this new emerging field of nutritional mental health or nutritional psychiatry, in which we explain how inflammation, the microbiome, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial function all work together, and all pathways point to the importance of diet and nutrition. So finally, I've gotten so far, and I haven't given you a single study on the use of micronutrients to treat mental illness. I'll send you any articles that you want, but I still want to make some general points. Why might it be beneficial? Just so that you know, there are more than 25 positive findings, RCTs to date, showing multi-nutrient formulas helping people with depression, anxiety, ADHD. You can see the list there. Now, some of those formulas are B-complex, so that's just a few nutrients. Some are what I call multi-nutrient, like the work on the offenders, which was done in both the UK and Holland. And they tend to have 20 to 25 nutrients. And then the oh, I guess I have it on this next slide. And then there are two formulas that were developed in Alberta, my home province, which have about 15 vitamins, 15 minerals, and there are about 35 peer-reviewed publications on those. This is just an idea of what the multi-nutrient treatment studies are. After looking at those biochemical pathways, I just don't understand how reviewers can say what's the important nutrient. I don't understand why, you know, articles have been rejected because people have said, literally, go back and redo the study with a single nutrient. I think we need to be teaching brain metabolism because people aren't getting it. And here are just a few comments about the various studies that have been done and the various formulas. Now, I want to tell you what I say to high school students, and I hope that doesn't offend you, but I show them that serotonin pathway, by the way. That's being used in elementary schools in the province of Alberta now to tell people, show them concretely why it's important that they make good food choices. But this kind of slide, I think, is something you'll remember. Our little 2.5 to 3 pound brain here accounts for only 2% of our body weight, but it represents 20 to 50% of the metabolic demands. So one could ask our hosts today, Victoria and Andy, why isn't 20 to 50% of our program on nutrition above the neck? But I won't ask that. You can bring it up in your reviews. Sorry, I teased them about it last year too, but in a different way. The point is that when we're eating, we are feeding mostly our brains and our hearts in terms of the metabolic demands on our food intake. Each of us has about 6 liters, or that's quarts, okay? 6 quarts of blood in us, and about 1 liter or quart passes through our brains every single minute that our heart is beating. So just picture that, an entire quart going through this little 2.5, 3 pound brain, of course bringing oxygen, but also bringing nutrients, taking away waste products also. That means that we need to be constantly adding nutrients to the way we're bathing our brain at all times. I don't see how it's justifiable to study one nutrient at a time. There are single nutrient diseases that were discovered a long time ago, which often have psychiatric symptoms associated with them. But what we're dealing with now in the current mental health epidemic, and it is an epidemic, where 20% of our population is taking psychiatric medication. I mean, to me, that's insane. When in 2001, it was 5%. 5%. And now it's 20%. There's something wrong here. So my closing comments are from a social point of view. I want to talk about healthcare costs very briefly, and then my view of a better world. This is a graph of the Canadian cost of treating mental disorders, but it's no different. The curve would be no different in the US or any other country. The first point is 2011, and all the subsequent points are if you follow the curve outward, where we're going to be in 40 years, and it's scary. So we need to pay attention to the fact that treating people with micronutrients or treating them with simply teaching them diet and cooking and so forth is important for our social purse, our budget. Last year I told you about this case study of Andrew, a child with very severe psychosis who was treated for 6 months as an inpatient. This was in Calgary, Alberta. He was very seriously disturbed, and I told you in detail about the kinds of hallucinations and everything he had. It's published if you want to see it. I didn't know the family, but I was brought in to deal with the data. Well, I don't even know how to analyze data like this, you know, but I graphed it. I mean, these, what statistic would you use? As everything goes to zero, his visual and auditory hallucinations, when he went on to one of the Alberta broad spectrum formulas. And we followed him now since 2009. But here's the important point. We had a health economist pull the cost of treating him for 6 months as an inpatient, which is much less than in the US, and then compare that to the subsequent 6 months when he was treated only with micronutrients. And of course, not only did he become well on the micronutrient formula, but it cost less than 2%. Well, last month, we published a second cost analysis. We're nowhere near being able to do this in populations. There's no funding to do it yet. But when I can, I try to get healthcare costs. So this is a woman who was ill for a very long time. She was treated in Ontario, BC, and Alberta. BC is British Columbia, and Alberta, at an average cost of about $60,000 a year. And then in 2000, that was from 1997. And in 2001, she began a cross titration onto one of the Alberta formulas and off medications. From 2002 to the present, she has spent zero, and of course we have a single payer system, so we can pull this. We know she's never been seen in a hospital for any kind of mental problem since 2002, and it has cost her on average $760. That's out of her own pocket because it's not insured. There's no way to get money yet for nutrient treatment. And this graph, I think, is an interesting one because what it shows is, okay, in the early years when she was spending about $60,000 of our tax money for treatment of her mental disorder, there are all these hidden costs. This is the cost of her disability every single year, $24,000. Okay? You multiply that by 20% of our population. I mean, there's a lot of money involved in treating and caring for people who are mentally ill. And of course, there was no cost for nutrients during those first few years. And then since 2002, zero for hospitalization. And when her family let her go off of disability, went down to zero. They were scared. They just weren't sure that she should be off it. And then $760 a month for her nutrients out of her pocket. And so in 2 case studies of successful treatment, we've shown less than 2% and less than 10%. Think about what our countries could do with that kind of savings in the healthcare budget. So this is my view of a better future for mental health, and I've already said a little bit of it. I think every clinician's office, anyone dealing with mental health, should be teaching nutrition, teaching cooking, teaching basic brain metabolism so that people know that everything that they put in their mouth is affecting how those brain cells work every single day. The nutrients should be the primary treatment, along with all kinds of other things like exercise, psychosocial support, lifestyle changes should be #1 primary treatment. Medication has its place as a supplement. That's why I tend not to call the micronutrients a supplement. Medication should be the supplementary treatment when you don't get enough benefit from micronutrients. And some people don't, believe me. This is not magic, right? And also, there's a very major place for psychiatric medication in the short term for crises. Now, you have in your slides which formula to take or study. I personally think evidence-based medicine is extremely important, especially in the natural health treatment world. We should be as rigorous as anything else. And so you have this on your slides. These are all of the multi-nutrient and broad spectrum formulas for which there is empirical data. Most of them are B vitamins. Many of them are why am I pointing there? So you can't see. Many of them are B vitamins, B complex, because that's very useful in stress. We showed it was as good as broad spectrum in people who are undergoing a trauma of a disaster, a flood in Calgary. That's a different study. And inside toward the middle are a variety of multi-broad spectrum kinds of formulas. And I gave you the websites. I'm not affiliated with any of them, right? You understand that now? And then if you have any questions, comments, if you want well, I guess you can get my slides. If you want to join my email update list, there are lectures online. You can just contact me. There's an excellent TEDx talk by Julia Ruckledge, who has the most active research program in the world on micronutrient treatment of mental disorders. She's at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. And if you want to help support researchers through a 501c3 charitable fund, contact me about that. Thank you for your attention.